Welcome to this episode of the Australian Naval History podcast series, where we examine an event in or an aspect of the Royal Australian Navy's history. The Naval Studies Group at the University of New South Wales is supported in this series by the Royal Australian Navy's Sea Power Centre, the Australian Naval Institute, the Naval Historical Society of Australia, and the Submarine Institute of Australia. Hello, I'm Commander Alastair Cooper, Deputy Director of the Sea Power Centre Australia. This is the first of two episodes devoted to one of the most heroic groups ever to serve Australia in war. They were the Coastwatchers of World War II. These men and one woman reported on shipping, air movements, and saved stranded servicemen in the islands to the north of Australia during World War II. With the Japanese onslaught in 1941 and 42, they stayed behind enemy lines to continue their vital work. They faced great danger with courage and resolution. The Coastwatchers organisation played a pivotal role in the Solomons campaign and led the United States Admiral William Bull Halsey to say, "The Coastwatchers saved Guadalcanal and Guadalcanal saved the Pacific." To discuss the truly compelling story of the Coastwatchers, I am joined by Mr. Jim Burrowes. And Jim, we're honoured to have you with us today as one of the last surviving, or as the last surviving radio operator who is part of the Coastwatcher organisation. Thank you for joining us. Jim Burrowes, in 1942, you were an 18-year-old member of the Australian Army. How did you come to join the Coastwatchers?
Alice, if you don't mind, there's been a lot of talk from the previous ones about the Coastwatchers. But I'd just like to establish two things. First of all, I was very pleased to be invited here because, as I mentioned to Peter before, this is a Navy operation. Most people think of Coastwatchers as Army. They were Navy, thanks to Eric Felt. Secondly, the basic components of a coastwatching family were threefold. They needed these expatriates with the background that Peter mentioned, and you mentioned John, recruited. Mm-hmm. They need a radio operator, of which I was one.
Yep.
And they need the natives. Three components. Later on they got military people to support, but those three components, without any one of them, without me, for example, there would not have been Coastwatchers. So I want to make that clear. As for joining the Army, my two brothers were, I was 16 when the war started. My two brothers were already in the services because my older brother was a Royal Australian Engineer militia, disparagingly called chocos they were, which was very rude because they were in the Army. And my twin brother, Tom, who was a cadet, a Royal Australian cadet, was automatically called up. So on the day of induction, we turned up at Albert Park Barracks, and there's a big crowd milling around, and some sergeant major came up and said, "Hands up those who are a school teacher or have worked in an office." Because I'd worked in an office as office boy for a year, getting 18 shillings a week, I put my hand up. In that way, they must have thought we were a bit more intelligent than those. Your inventory. So, unbeknownst to me at that time, I became later a Coastwatcher. First of all, we did 6 weeks training, learning Morse code at the RMIT. Mm-hmm. Then I was transferred to land headquarters, where we had the only radio contact with Moresby when the Japs were 26 down there. 8-hour shifts round the clock, pretty tough work. And then that's right. I'm talking about.
It's all good. So you land headquarters, and then how did you get involved with the Coastwatchers?
Then as the AWARs came along and released us, we moved up north to Queensland.
AWARs being Australian Women's Army
Services. Yeah. Where we continued on. But when we were there, they called for 6 volunteers of radio operators to join a a very dangerous mission up north. There's an old adage, you never volunteer for anything in the army, but I couldn't put my hand up quick enough because my two brothers were up there, and a big high adventure. I was only 18 or something. So we went up there and found that we'd been seconded, and no one in the public knew at the time, and probably don't know now. Became part of the US 7th Fleet with the Americans. They had an amphibious landing force whereby we then, with a leader they'd co-opted from the expatriates and a radio operator, where we moved around various islands to see the Japanese presence, including Gasmata, which was taken over by the Japs, and Woodlark Island and what have you. So after about 9 months, they disbanded, and 3 of the 6 wanted to go back to Australia. I said no way, and we then transferred to the Coastwatchers. That's how I became a Coastwatcher. After 2.5 years early, the rest of the 4 years in the Army was Coastwatcher.
Thank you. That's fantastic. We've mentioned teleradios a number of times now, and Jim, as a radio operator, I'm figuring you might be able to tell us a little bit about them.
Yes, Alistair. Initially, we worked on an AWA, which is privately owned wireless association, civvies, equipment called a 3A and a 3B. They were fairly massive, a foot by 2 feet or what have you, 3 units. They did require power, obviously, and therefore they came along with a good old Bigson Stratton engine, a generator, and car batteries. This collection took about 12 to 16 natives to carry it through the bush, and they were limited because of the weight and the inconvenience to about 5 miles a day. I used these in my forward operations at Milne Bay briefly, then Nadzab, which was the main US air base. Then I moved up to Madang, where the Aussies had just landed, and I used these. Later on, when I crossed over to New Britain and went up into the jungle in Japanese-occupied territory, we'd reverted to a little, would you believe, made by Radio Corporation in Melbourne, an ATR-4A. It was battery-driven, and it was just a case of about 1 foot by 2 feet in a steel case, and just sitting on a group of batteries. That could be carried with 1 or even 2 natives. That's the difference there. So the teleradio, whilst initially used in forward bases, were replaced by this smaller unit.
Okay, so the teleradio is different to an ATR-4A.
Absolutely, yeah.
All right, but the teleradio was initially that large.
Correct. The teleradio was involved all that battery stuff,
yep,
and generator, etc., which was eliminated with the little ATR-4A.
Wow.
And that had a radio of 500 miles, yeah.
Range of about 5. As a follow-up, I understand that you would have had to have used some codes, and particularly the Playfair code. Can you describe its importance?
Yeah, originally we used a Playfair system, which was a low-grade code that involved having a book and looking at page numbers and heaven knows what I've forgotten now. And it was actually modified by Eric, and in fact it was called initially Playfair Felt Method. Later on, with advancement in technology, it was reverted, the code was reverted to Bull code, BULL, code, and that was a more sophisticated method of coding. I often wonder, well, so I don't often wonder, I am now, how we must have had a pencil and paper, and we would have had a table or anything like that, so how we did I don't know, but the code was involving sending a series of 5 letters, like could be XYZ28 or something like that, a series of those. So they were the codes, and they were how we transmitted. One other important thing is we had a little crystal called an X crystal, and that was dedicated just to the Coastwatchers, which we used.
Okay, and what did the X crystal do?
Don't ask me.
All right. Jim Burrowes, I understand Rebel has a special significance for you and your family. Can you tell us about that?
Yes, unfortunately, Alistair, my elder brother, who was in the Royal Australian Engineers when the war broke out, that's in Europe, but had been called up, and I think I mentioned before they were badly called shockos and what have you, but they were forwarded up to Rebel in February. That's 10 months before Pearl Harbor, and anyway, they were captured when the Japanese landed on the 22nd of January. Incidentally, in one of his letters from the Japs saying that the Japs dropped a lot of letters from all the prisoners saying, "We are prisoners of the Japanese and being well looked after," which was a load of crap. And in one of Robert's letters back, which is allowed to say one other, get Jim out of the army, but it's too late because I was there a week in the army before Pearl Harbor. So he was on the, after 5 years of slavery, 5 months of slavery, working with Japs in tunnels and unloading the ship. He was on the Montevideo Maru prison ship that was sent to being transported to Highland Island working. But as everyone knows, I think it was sunk by an American submarine because it was an unmarked prison ship, and 1,053 members went down, drowned, including my brother. I'll try and make it quick. My other brother, who was my twin brother, he'd been in the Air Force cadets. Had been called up, obviously, when the war started. He would have been intended to go to Canada and England to fight over in Britain, but the Japs intervened. They were diverted to Goodenough Island, just north of Milne Bay, in a 100 squadron of Beaufort bombers, which were known as Flying Coffins. On his first flight out, never heard of again. So I lost 2 brothers at Rebel. Bit tough on the old mum, who was one of the women of the West from her early history, and one of the lines in that poem they wrote about the women of the West, and you give your sons whatever, and she lost her 2. Our family, which was a family of 7, during the war, my father died, my sister died in childbirth, so we became a family of 3 instead of 7. But that's why it has special significance of Rebel. The destiny of the 3 of us, 3 brothers, but I'm the only one that came home.
Well, we're grateful for all of you, particularly for you being here.
Yes, indeed.
Alistair, do you mind if I add to John?
Yeah.
If I may, and this has been one of my main articles in that tells the whole story, that authenticated. I knew this story 70 years ago, but had no substantiation until I read in a book by James Duffy, a US historian, and there it was in black and white that 2 Australian Coastwatchers pinged the Japanese fleet going down from Rebel to capture Moresby. it brought about the Battle of the Coral Sea, and there was the first major repulse of the Japanese from their sweep down from the northern hemisphere to the south, and they were beaten and had to retreat. If they had taken Moresby, they would have just walked in like they did Rabaul, they were stupid. They should have done it 3 months earlier, when instead of chasing poor old Coastwatcher, poor old members down the island, they should have done that earlier. But they didn't. The ramifications are unbelievable. If they'd captured if they'd captured Moresby, and no doubt they were within bombing distance of Brisbane and Rockhampton and all those places, it would have chopped off the contact or the review of the Americans using Australia as a base. There would have been no Kokoda, where the Aussies, young kids, heroes, repulsed the Japanese by land. And thirdly, Doug MacArthur, who he would have been stuck down there in the southern hemisphere. As it was now, he was released to go up into the north coast, do his island shopping, Sador, Idapi, Wewak, Morotai, Hollandia, then up to Philippines, and eventually to the end to win the Bombing War. So they were the ramifications which no one really knows. It's in my website. If you just think of TLC, Tender Loving Care, just the last Coastwatcher, that's the main story. I've got other stories, but that's the main story in a nutshell, what the Coastwatchers really did.
Jim, thank you very, very much. I think if I take anything from this, it's that we underestimate the Coastwatcher story at our peril.
That's my last mission at 96 next week. I'm going to make sure everyone in Australia knows to be proud of the Coastwatchers.
Agile and courageous that they were. Thank you.
Not about that. We just had a job to do and we did it.
Well, at this point...
It was a high adventure.
At this point, Jim, I think you might have met Lieutenant Commander, Acting Commander James McManus. Can you tell me what he was like?
Yes, Alistair. Actually, Betty's mentioned a bit about him in respect that he took over as supervising intelligence officer when Eric had his heart attack. But I found him with some awe. He was a big boss, and had a fairly intensive interview with him at Hindhoff House in Queen Street, Brisbane, where they were the headquarters. I never met Eric, unfortunately, but McManus, he was, as I say, very dour. And he was an Irishman, and he checked me out on Morse code. Morse code, was a dot and a dash, da-da, a dot for the d and dash for. So I still know my Morse code, da da di di da 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 di da di di, except that that's the alphabet, but I won't go through it all. It's amazing how it sticks. And
you've got a communicator alongside you who'll probably be joining you.
Yeah, it was also interesting that the, a dot is just a dot and a dash is just a dash. But I found that when we were dealing with the AWA civvies in Moresby, I could tell who was on the other end, and likewise they could tell me. One of them was quick and fast, the other was do whatever. It's just like a signature. It was amazing, and it's only a dot and a dash. I appreciated then with McManus, getting back to McManus, at the end of the war in November, I received a very nice personal commendation about how, I'll be honest, how good I was as a radio operator and volunteer and all that. And but he got one thing wrong. He said how I was good technically. Do you know, in the 6 weeks that we learnt Morse code, not one word, not 1 hour, not 1 minute did we learn anything about the technical side. One day up in the islands in Japanese territory, damn wireless wouldn't work. I thought, what the hell do I do? And I pulled it out of its sheath, turned it upside down. I thought, all these valves and God knows what condensers. And it was a sunny day. I turned the radio on, turned upside down, hoping something happened with the radio on. And you wouldn't believe it, I had a brown paper lunch bag of spare parts. So I picked out the red and the green and the yellow and the red and shorted them across, got a signal. To this day, I don't know how I put it together. I'm sure I didn't use my teeth. I didn't have any soldering iron or didn't have any pliers, but I got the damn thing working. And without that, we would have been mute. We would have had to somehow organise through another party somehow to get another radio dropped. But I appreciated the commendation by Eric, by McManus. And I just wanted to correct him on that, but I didn't bother.
Jim, you had some experience along that northern coast of New Guinea. I'm just wondering if you can explain to me two things. One, what the environment was like and what your experiences were. But I was also wondering if you could reflect a little bit more. We mentioned in the previous episode that a coast watching organisation was not just the coast watcher and the radio operator, but also the local people. So as you talk about the north coast of New Guinea and your experiences there, I'm just wondering if you can tell us a bit about the local people as well.
Yes, Alistair, I served at Milne Bay and then forward bases in Nadzab, which was a big US Air Force base, and then up in Madang where the Australians had landed there, and they were forward bases for the parties that were already up in the Sepik and Wewak. I then finished there and flew down in coincidentally a Beaufort bomber down to Moresby, and then I went by seaplane, a US Mariner, to the south coast of New Britain, then up by barge and into the jungle. Environment was always we had, and I'd like to pay homage to some native troops, not quite the environment, but they're always with us doing the thatched shelter and what have you, cooking our food even occasionally, doing a bit of washing, most importantly climbing the tree to put up our aerial. As I mentioned before, they were one of the essential components of the coast watching parties. So that pretty well covers my movements in the north coast. But the natives, they were just wonderful. We soon, because we lived with them, we soon learnt pidgin English. Long time before me stop, long place, or we call him rebel now, man below, long Japan, you come in, now shoot him, and etc. etc. It was sort of a very simple descriptive language, but we soon learnt that to communicate with them. They were wonderful. In the end of the week, we'd give them some twisted tobacco, and that was their pay, I'm ashamed to say. So, they were, and I've recently an article which was posted in the Papua New Guinea talking about the value of the native troops. They were our environment.
Thank you.
Recall that we've heard previously about Halsey and how he saw the coast watching organisation. The Americans were also quick to recognise the efforts of a number of coast watchers.
Thank you.
Can I just add that the Americans wanted to recognise by medals of the, including myself, the people that worked behind in enemy territory, but it was knocked back by the Australians. Now the Australians did do quite a few medals, including natives. So I want to credit that, but the American ones were knocked back. Anyway, that's beside the point. His book became the Bible, written with meticulous detail, and interesting that after he took ill and stopped writing in October, subsequently he listed another addendum of several pages to wrap up the story. It's a great book.
Okay.
I got an original.
Yes.
Thank you both.
Got it from my mum.
Peter, Rupert Long, ever the organiser, wanted a permanent memorial to the sacrifice of the Coastwatchers. What ended up materialising?
So in 1948, Rupert Long suggested to Gordon Laycock, who was the director of lighthouses in New Guinea, that one of the new lighthouses which were being built along the coast after the war should be built from a public subscription as an enduring memorial to the Coastwatchers. So in typical Rupert Long fashion, he had established a Coastwatchers Memorial Committee. He had some of his team, like Brooksbank and other people that had worked for him for many years. They populated the committee and they did the work under the broad sweep of Rupert's direction. They were very effective. Madang was selected as the site, which was very appropriate because of how Madang figured both in Eric Felt's life in the interwar period, but also in terms of the contribution of the Coastwatchers in that area. The donations were large and small. They came from Australia, New Zealand, UK, and also America. Some of the key donators were Admiral Halsey, Vice President Richard Nixon, who had served in Guadalcanal area as a young officer. Construction of the futuristic-looking lighthouse. It looks a bit like a rocket, and it got underway in early 1959, and it was unveiled on the 15th of August that year. The event also served as one only reunion of the Coastwatchers. Rupert had organised a RAAF aircraft to ferry key VIPs, key people from the intelligence world and Coastwatchers from Australia. The US Naval Attaché in Canberra, who at that time had an aircraft, he had served in Guadalcanal as an aviator. He provided his aircraft to ferry people. And also there were many expatriates and 40 native Coastwatchers from the highlands and mainland New Guinea and also the outlying islands descended on Madang for that weekend. The lighthouse was switched on that evening of the 15th of August by Senator John Gordon, who was Minister for the Navy at the time. Eric Felt gave a very moving speech, and that night a reunion was held at Hotel Madang. In fact, one of the Coastwatchers foresaw what the events that night would be, and that dead Japs would lie 3 feet high around the bar in Madang Hotel with all the stories. One Coastwatcher called them the reunion of Eric Felt's gang. And another said that evening was so fantastic, we never thought we would see each other again. And Jim's point about how a Coastwatcher team was the radio operator, the Coastwatcher, and the native support team. On many of those small teams were reunited on that weekend for the first and only time.
Thank you very much, Peter. Jim, you were unfortunately unable to attend the opening, but you have made a subsequent pilgrimage to the memorial light. What are your feelings?
It's interesting. I was never told you about that, otherwise I might have been there. But coincidentally, on a cruise my wife and I did up to Japan and back, we called in at Guam and then next stop was Madang, where I was for 6 months anyway, on Billio Island, just across from where But I took the opportunity to go up and see the lighthouse, and I was very impressed. I had a little quiet moment, thinking about poor old Blue and Jack Bunning, and on the side thinking I'm glad it wasn't me. But it's very interesting to see 38 names of Coastwatchers that didn't make it. 38 out of about 400 represents just, if you like, a fairly small percentage, but bearing in mind our strict mandate, as Betty pointed out before, was not to confront the enemy, just to keep and hide and spy on the enemy and report movements. They're the ones that unfortunately got caught, including one of those 6, Les Carlson, who was captured and killed with John Murphy when he was captured in New Britain. So one of the 6 of us got killed as well, yeah. So that's just an aside that Blue and the other names were enshrined in that nice memorial.
Thank you.
To conclude this remarkable story, I'd like to give each speaker a chance to give their final thoughts about the Coastwatchers. And I think, given that we're talking about Coastwatchers, Jim Burrowes, it's only natural that we would turn to you first.
Thanks, Alistair. I appreciate that. I might have mentioned the previous one, but it's important. What I've said at 96, my mission now is to let all the people know in Australia the importance. The main article I've written in my website was how the Coastwatchers turned the tide of the Pacific War. That was so significant, it's hard to understand, but I want everyone to know that. And generally speaking, if anyone's interested, if they just think of TLC as a code word, but then that stands for The Last Coastwatcher, no spaces. Go to Google, put that in, you'll find that article. Of all the articles I've done, probably about 20, that is the most important. That's the key one of the Coastwatchers' feats that I want everyone to know about. Not to mention, of course, the famous saying by Bull Halsey, how the Coastwatchers saved. So that's my session. Thanks very much, Alistair and fellow interviewees. I've enjoyed reminiscing these occasions. Thank you very much, and all the best.
Thank you very much, Jim. And look, say for everybody, it's The Last Coastwatcher. If you search for that online, you'll find Jim's website, which is excellent. And we'll certainly see what we can do to link to it to let people know.
Yeah,
Betty,
appreciate that.
Okay, well, I full-heartedly support Jim's goal to have the Coastwatchers more recognised and more known about them and the important role they played. And I think it would be really wonderful if we could have a memorial to the Coastwatchers here in Australia. It's fine to have one in Papua New Guinea, but how many Australians go there? Whereas so many people come here to the Australian War Memorial. I just think a dedicated memorial to the Coastwatchers would be very nice.
thank you. John?
Well, I think that the coast watching story it stands out in the annals of the Australian Navy's history. It was important at the time. When one looks at the geographic picture to our north, where we have New Guinea, New Britain, New Ireland, the Solomons, the New Hebrides, one wonders today whether in the future there might be a need for a similar organisation, notwithstanding the fact that we have other means of intelligence collecting now. But eyes on the ground, I think, prove that it worked exceptionally well. These are our nearest neighbours. They're our friends. Who knows? Some food for thought.
Peter Jones.
At the base of the Coastwatch Memorial Lighthouse is inscribed a poem, and it ends with the words, They waited and warned and died that we might live. And I think that sums up the role and the contribution and the sacrifice of the Coastwatchers. They were truly the bravest of the brave.
Regrettably, that is all we have time for this episode. I'd like to thank John Perryman, Peter Jones, Betty Lee, and particularly Jim Burrowes, the last Coastwatcher. Thank you all for joining us. And for more great Australian naval history, just search for Naval Studies Group wherever you found this podcast. Goodbye for now.